Oh, Sierra 1, do you have a visual? God damn it! Answer me! The voice in the earpiece cracked, distorted by static and panic. It was Master Chief Miller, the same man who, 12 hours ago, hadn't even looked her in the eye. Now, he sounded like a child screaming in the dark. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance didn't reply immediately. She forced her heart rate down, watching the rhythmic jump of the pulse in her scope's reticle. The heat shimmer off the valley floor was gone, replaced by the lengthening, bloody shadows of dusk. Sierra 1, they are flanking R3. We are combat ineffective in 30 seconds. I see them, Chief, Elena whispered, her voice dry as parchment. Then take the shot. I have 3 targets. 1 is a spotter, 2 are maneuvering with RPGs. I have 1 round left in the mag, and my bolt is jamming. Vance, don't you dare! If I fire, they pinpoint my nest. If I don't, you burn. She adjusted the windage knob. Click, click. I'm breaking protocol. I'm drawing fire. Elena, negative. Hold your... Crack. The recoil slammed into her bruised shoulder. She didn't wait to see the pink mist. She racked the bolt, praying the grit wouldn't seize the metal. Target down, she breathed. Here comes the hate. The ridge around her exploded in dust and shrapnel. Cut to black. 9 hours earlier, Fob Keating, Kunar Province. The air in the briefing room at FOB Keating tasted of stale Copenhagen, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of CLP gun oil. It was a dense, masculine atmosphere that usually expelled outsiders like a foreign virus. Staff Sergeant Elena Viper Vance stood by the corrugated metal wall, her posture rigid, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She was invisible, yet painfully conspicuous. Her uniform was too clean. Her boots, though dusted with the omnipresent Afghan powder, lacked the scuffs of a kinetic firefight. To the 6 men sitting on the folding chairs in the center of the room, she was a walking billboard for liability. All right, listen up, Master Chief Miller said, slapping a map against the plywood easel. Miller was a block of granite carved into the shape of a man, his beard thick with gray, his eyes hard and dismissive. Intel puts the HVT in the village of Kamdesh. We insert via helo at 0200, hump 4 clicks to the ridge, and set containment. He traced a line on the map with a marker that squeaked like a dying mouse. Alpha and Bravo teams breach. Sierra Element provides overwatch here. He jabbed a finger at a ridgeline marked Elevation 2400. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at the empty space next to her. Petty Officer Davis, Miller barked. Chief, a lanky SEAL with a dip in his lip responded. You're on babysitting duty. Take the army stray. Get her to the ridge. If she falls behind, leave her. If she wheezes, gag her. I don't want our position blown because someone's heart rate spiked walking up a hill. A ripple of low laughter moved through the room. It wasn't friendly. It was the predatory chuckle of a pack reinforcing its hierarchy. Elena's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, her boots crunching softly on the grit. Master Chief. Miller turned slowly, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken. Problem, Staff Sergeant? I don't need a babysitter, Elena said, her voice steady, pitching it low to cut through the ambient hum of the generator outside. And my heart rate rests at 42. I can carry my own weight, plus the XM 2010. Miller stared at her. The room went silent. The laughter died, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. He walked over to her, invading her personal space until she could smell the coffee on his breath. He looked at the patch on her shoulder, the sniper tab, and then up to her eyes. You got a lot of range badges, Vance, Miller said softly. Paper targets? Nice and static? Maybe some deer back in Kentucky? Texas, she corrected. I don't care, he snapped. You have never seen combat. You have never heard a round crack past your ear. You have never watched a man bleed out while you try to calculate windage. You are a green stamp, fresh from the post office, unlicked and unposted. He turned back to his men. Davis, you stick to her like glue. She is a camera with a pulse. She does not engage unless I give the order. If she fires a round without my say-so, I will personally throw her off the bird on the ride home. Clear? Clear, Chief, Davis drawled, shooting Elena a look of pity mixed with annoyance. Briefing adjourned. Gear up. Wheels up in 1 hour. The men stood up, scraping chairs. They moved around her like a stream flowing around a rock, fluid and ignoring her existence. As they checked their gear, checking pistol slides, loading magazines, the intimacy of their bond was palpable. They spoke in shorthand, in grunts and nods. Elena was outside of the circle. She walked to her kit bag in the corner. She unzipped it, revealing the XM 2010 enhanced sniper rifle. The cold steel felt grounding. She ran a finger over the bolt action. It was a beautiful machine, a 300 Winchester Magnum caliber beast capable of reaching out 200 meters. Don't take it personal, a voice said. Elena looked up. It was Davis, her assigned spotter. He was adjusting his plate carrier. I don't take it personal, Elena said, checking her scope rings. I take it professional. Miller lost a guy last rotation. Sniper missed a call, Davis said, his voice lowered. He hates working with attachments, especially... He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at her. Especially women? Elena finished for him. Davis shrugged, not denying it. Just stay low, Vance. Don't try to be a hero. Just carry the radio and tell us what you see. We do the heavy lifting. He clapped her on the shoulder, a patronizing pat, and walked out into the blinding sunlight. Elena stood alone in the dim briefing room. She pulled a magazine from her vest. 5 rounds of 300 Win Mag. Heavy. Lethal. She slotted it into the pouch. Heavy lifting, she whispered to the empty room. She slung the 60-pound ruck over her shoulders, grabbed her rifle, and walked toward the door. The heat hit her like a physical blow, 105 degrees in the shade. The dust swirled around her boots. She didn't know it yet, but the man who just dismissed her as a liability would be begging for her help before the sun set. And she would have to decide whether to answer. The Chinook heavy-lift helicopter didn't land. It hovered 3 feet off the deck, kicking up a blinding brownout of dust and gravel. The ramp lowered, and the team surged out into the darkness like a single, multi-limbed organism. Elena hit the ground last, the 60-pound ruck slamming against her spine. The wash from the twin rotors tore at her ghillie suit, threatening to strip the burlap scrim from her netting. Then, with a whine of turbines that pitched up into a scream, the bird lifted and banked away, swallowed instantly by the black void of the Korengal night. Silence rushed back in, heavy and ringing. Master Chief Miller didn't wait for eyes to adjust. He didn't check comps. He simply raised a gloved hand, signaled move, and started climbing. The target ridge was 4 kilometers away and 600 meters up, a vertical ascent through loose shale and scrub brush. It was a movement that would take a standard infantry platoon 3 hours. Miller clearly intended to do it in 90 minutes. Elena adjusted her PVS-14 night vision monocular. The world turned into a grainy, green phosphor tunnel. She could see the IR strobes blinking rhythmically on the backs of the SEALs' helmets, little pulses of invisible light keeping them connected. They moved fast. Too fast. It wasn't just operational urgency. It was a test. They were trying to smoke her. 10 minutes in, the slope steepened to 45 degrees. Elena's lungs burned. The air here was thin, robbing her muscles of oxygen. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. The loose shale under her boots threatened to slide, creating noise, but she placed her feet with deliberate precision, heel to toe, rolling the weight to distribute the crunch. Ahead of her, Davis slipped. A shower of rocks clattered down the ravine. Elena stopped instantly, freezing her silhouette against the rock face. The entire column halted. "Watch your step!" Miller's voice crackled in her earpiece, breathless but controlled. He didn't call out Davis by name. If Elena had made that noise, she knew he would have flayed her alive on the comms. They pushed on. The pace was punishing. Elena felt the sweat soaking her base layer, turning cold in the biting mountain wind. Her thighs screamed, but she locked her focus on the boots of the man in front of her. Don't gap. Don't lag. Don't give them the satisfaction. By the time they reached the false crest, 3 kilometers up, the SEALs were heaving. Even Miller had slowed. Elena, conditioned by marathon rucks and solitary endurance training, regulated her breathing through her nose. She checked her heart rate monitor, 155 BPM, high but sustainable. She scanned the terrain. To her left, a goat path cut across the ridgeline, a narrow scar in the rock. She froze. "Hold," she whispered into the mic. The column stopped. "Vance," Miller's voice was a growl. "We are behind timeline. Unless you see a tank, keep moving." "Ground sign at 9 o'clock, she said, ignoring his tone. She moved off the vector, crouching low near the goat path. Under the green glow of her NVG, the details were subtle. A cluster of rocks had been displaced. The darker, unoxidized side of a stone was facing up. "Petty Officer Davis, get her moving," Miller ordered. "Wait!" Elena hissed. She reached out, hovering her hand over the dirt without touching it. "There's a footprint here. Partial tread. American sole pattern? No, it's a knockoff. Local market boot." Davis crunched over to her. "I don't see shit, Vance. It's a goat trail. Goats kick rocks." "Goats don't walk single file in tactical spacing," she countered, pointing to a second disturbance 3 meters further down. "Someone came down this trail recently, within the last hour. The earth is still dark." "Chief," Davis keyed his radio. "She thinks she sees tracks." "I don't think," Elena snapped, the fatigue fraying her professional mask. "This is an infill route. If they came down, they know we're coming up. We're walking into a fatal funnel." "Sierra 1, Miller cut in, his voice icy. "Intel says this sector is cold. The village is asleep. You are seeing ghosts because you're nervous. We have a capture window to hit. If we miss it because you're analyzing goat shit, the mission is a wash. Chief, I strongly recommend we hook right, add 20 minutes, and flank the ridge," Elena pressed. "Negative. Maintain vector. Davis, if she stops again, drag her." The line clicked dead. Elena stared at the overturned stone. It was a scream in the silence, a glaring warning sign written in the language of the earth. Miller was ignoring it because it didn't fit his timeline, and because it came from the mouth of a woman he didn't respect. She looked at Davis. He just jerked his head uphill. "Let's go, Viper. Don't be that guy." She tightened her grip on the rifle sling. Every instinct in her body was firing warning flares. They are waiting. But she was a staff sergeant attached to a Tier 1 element. Her job was to support, not to command. "Copy," she whispered. She stepped over the track, careful not to destroy the evidence she hoped she wouldn't need to verify later. They crested the final ridge 40 minutes later. The village of Kamdesh lay below them in the valley floor, a cluster of mud brick compounds sleeping under the starlight. It looked peaceful. It looked dead. Elena moved to her assigned overwatch position, a rocky outcropping 800 meters from the target building. She unbuckled her pack, sliding into the prone position. She extended the bipod legs of the XM-2010 and settled the stock into her shoulder. She pulled the scope cover off. The glass was clear. She dialed the magnification up to 12x. "Sierra 1 set," she reported. "I have eyes on target." "Copy, Sierra," Miller replied. "Alpha moving to breach." Elena scanned the rooftops. Nothing. No sentries. No movement. It was perfect. Too perfect. She remembered the overturned rock on the trail. She shifted her scope to the tree line above the village, the place where a counter-ambush team would sit. The shadows were deep and impenetrable. "We are being watched," she thought, the hair on her arms standing up. "I am looking at them, and they are looking at us, waiting for us to walk into the jar." "Breach in 3, 2, 1. Below, a small explosion blew the gate of the main compound. The SEALs flowed in. Elena held her breath, her finger hovering outside the trigger guard, waiting for the world to explode. The explosion that breached the compound gate was a concise, surgical thump that barely registered against the valley walls. Through the Leupold Mark IV optic of her rifle, Elena watched the thermal bloom of the charge dissipate, replaced instantly by the kinetic flow of the SEAL team flooding the courtyard. They moved with the aggressive grace of apex predators, weapons up, sectors scanned, footsteps silent. "Alpha in, breaching main structure," Miller's voice came over the comms. It was flat, bored even. To him, this was just another door to kick in a decade-long war of kicked doors. Elena shifted her position slightly, the gravel digging into her elbows. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, panning slowly from the breach point to the surrounding buildings. The village of Kamdesh was a labyrinth of stacked stone and mud, built into the terraced hillside like a wasp's nest. Something was wrong. "Sierra, scan the rafters. Watch for squirters," Davis whispered from 5 meters to her right. He was scanning with his spotting scope, chewing gum with an irritating, rhythmic wet noise. "I'm scanning," Elena replied, her voice tight. "But there's nothing to scan." She dialed the magnification back to 10x to widen her field of view. Usually, a breach like this would trigger a reaction. Dogs barking, chickens scattering, lights flickering on in adjacent houses as neighbors woke up in terror. But the village remained a black void. There were no goats in the pens. There was no laundry hanging on the lines in the courtyards she could see into. "Chief," Elena keyed her mic. "Sierra 1. I have 0 pattern of life. The animal pens are empty. No civilian movement." "Copy, Sierra," Miller replied, distracted. "Maybe they sold the goats. Keep eyes on the roof." "It's too clean, Chief. It feels staged." "Clear the net, Vance." Elena gritted her teeth. She watched as Miller and Alpha team stacked up on the door of the target building, the residence of the HVT, high-value target. They threw a flashbang. The white light strobed through the windows, followed by the team storming the room. "Clear left, clear right. Room empty," a SEAL reported. "Move to the second deck," Miller ordered. Elena's heart began to hammer against her ribs. It wasn't just the empty house. It was the geometry of the valley. The compound was at the bottom of a bowl. The SEALs were currently standing in the center of an amphitheater, and the audience seats were the dark ridges looming above them. She pulled her eye away from the main compound and swept the high ground to the east, the shallows of the valley rim. Movement. It was subtle. A shift in the shadows near a ruined, jagged wall about 600 meters from her position and 400 meters above the SEALs. She held her breath, steadying the reticle. She waited. There. A glint. It wasn't the steady reflection of moonlight on a sniper scope. It was a rhythmic flash. Dot, dot, dash. A mirror. Someone was signaling. "Chief, get out!" Elena broke protocol, her voice rising an octave. "It's a signal. East Ridge, elevation 250. Vance, I told you to—" "They are signaling an initiation. It's a bait trap. Get out of the courtyard." "We have the HVT's intel in sight. Stand by," Miller barked, his stubbornness overriding her panic. He was in the glass house, the fatal funnel where he felt safe inside the walls, blind to the fact that the walls were transparent to the enemy above. Elena saw the second glint. This one wasn't a mirror. It was the distinct, terrifying flare of a backblast area clearing. "RPG!" she screamed. 3 o'clock. High angle. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for a confirmed weapon ID on the specific shooter. She saw the smoke plume erupt from the ruins on the East Ridge. The rocket-propelled grenade didn't scream. At this distance, the light arrived before the sound. She watched the streak of fire arc down from the darkness, aiming not for the building, but for the main gate, the SEAL's only exit. Boom. The explosion tore the heavy wooden doors off their hinges, collapsing the mud archway in a cloud of choking dust. The exit was sealed. "Contact! Contact front!" Miller's voice shattered, no longer bored. "We are taking heavy fire. 4 positions!" The silence of Kamdesh vanished. The night erupted. From the ridges above, muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies, dozens of them. A DSHK heavy machine gun opened up with a rhythmic thump, 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 the heavy 12.7mm rounds chewing through the mud walls of the compound where the SEALs were trapped. "I'm pinned!" Davis yelled beside her. "I can't see the shooter!" "I have him," Elena whispered. She didn't feel the fear anymore. The waiting was the hard part. Now it was just math. She settled the crosshairs on the origin of the DSHK tracers. The gunner was well concealed, firing through a murder hole in a stone wall. She could only see the muzzle flash. Distance, 820 meters. Wind, full value, left to right, 5 mph. Elevation, down angle, 15 degrees. She dialed 2 clicks of windage into the turret. She exhaled, emptying her lungs until she hit the respiratory pause. The world narrowed down to the amber center of the reticle. "Chief, keep your heads down," she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the chaos on the radio. "I'm engaging." She applied 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. The sear broke. Crack. The rifle kicked back into her shoulder, a solid, reassuring punch. She kept her eye open, tracking the vapor trail of the bullet as it sliced through the dark air. It took just over a second for the round to travel the distance. The DSHK stopped firing. "Target down," Elena said, racking the bolt. The brass casing spun out into the dirt, smoking. "Vance!" Miller screamed over the radio, the sound of concrete shattering in the background. "They're flanking us! West wall! West wall!" Elena shifted her aim. The ambush wasn't just an attack. It was an execution. And she was the only thing standing between the executioner and his victims. The silence of the DSHK lasted exactly 4 seconds. Through her scope, Elena watched a shadow detach itself from the darkness of the bunker. The figure grabbed the dead gunner by the vest and heaved him carelessly over the sandbags. The body tumbled down the scree, a limp rag doll discarded in the dirt. The new operator racked the heavy charging handle of the 12.7mm machine gun. "He's back up!" Elena screamed into the comms, but her voice was drowned out by the renewed hammering of the heavy weapon. Thump, thump, thump. The tracers were green lasers slicing through the night, chewing into the low mud wall where Miller and his team were huddled. "Moving! We are moving!" Miller yelled. "Covering fire!" The SEALs popped up, firing their suppressed carbines. Their 5.56mm rounds were like mosquito bites against the fortified stone of the enemy positions high on the ridge. They were fighting gravity, and gravity was winning. Elena didn't blink. She worked the bolt of the XM-2010, the brass ejected. A fresh cartridge slid into the chamber. Breathe, focus, squeeze. She aimed slightly lower this time, anticipating the gunner's hunch as he fired. The recoil slammed her again. Crack. The DSHK fell silent for the second time. The replacement gunner slumped forward over the receiver, his head resting on the cold steel as if taking a nap. "Gun down," Elena reported, her voice devoid of inflection. "Miller, move your element now. I can't hold this forever. Go! Go! Go!" Miller's voice was ragged. Below, the thermal signatures of the SEALs broke from the cover of the destroyed gate. They sprinted across the open courtyard toward a 2-story structure on the north side, the only building with thick enough walls to withstand the heavy rounds. But the ambush was a kill box designed by someone who knew American tactics. As the SEALs moved, muzzle flashes erupted from the terraced fields to the west. Small arms fire, AK-47s and PKM machine guns, raked the ground around their boots. Dust geysers erupted in a chaotic dance. "Taking fire from the west! Left flank!" Davis shouted, his spotting scope jittering as he tried to track multiple targets. "3 shooters in the tree line. Range 600. "I see them," Elena said. She couldn't shoot them all. A bolt-action sniper rifle was a scalpel, not a chainsaw. She had to choose. She scanned the tree line. 2 shooters were spraying wildly, praying and spraying. The third one was different. He was prone, steady, firing single shots, an enemy marksman. Prioritizing the marksman, she whispered to herself. She panned left. The shooter was partially obscured by a shrub. She could only see the heat bloom of his barrel and the top of his head. 600 meters. 0 wind closer to the ground. She fired. The round punched through the shrub and the head behind it. The heat signature vanished. 1 down, she counted. She racked the bolt. The motion was becoming rhythmic, a muscle memory drill drilled into her at Fort Benning. Fire, bolt, acquire, fire, bolt, acquire. She engaged the second gunman in the tree line. The bullet took him in the chest, spinning him around. The third gunman, seeing his comrades drop, abandoned his position and ducked behind a rock. "West flank suppressed," Elena said. The SEALs dove through the doorway of the northern building, piling over each other in a tangle of limbs and gear. "Alpha is secure," Miller gasped over the radio. "We are inside. Casualty report. Checking." There was a pause, filled only by the heavy breathing of men who had just outrun death. 2 walking wounded," Miller came back. "Ricochet to the arm, shrapnel to the leg. We are combat effective, but we are fixed. We can't poke our heads out." "Copy, Alpha," Elena said. She took her eye off the scope for a fraction of a second to check her rifle. Heat waves were starting to rise off the suppressor, a shimmering mirage that would distort her sight picture if she didn't manage it. She pulled a thermal cover over the can, cinching it tight. "Vance." Miller's voice was different now. The arrogance was gone. replaced by the stark, terrified clarity of a commander who realized he had lost control of the board. They know we're in this building. They're going to maneuver on us. You are the only eyes we have. I know, Elena said. They're going to bring up the RPGs again. Miller continued. If they hit this structure with a thermobaric warhead, we're cooked. I won't let them get close, Elena promised. It was a lie. She couldn't promise that. She had 17 rounds left in her magazine pouches and a rifle that was getting hotter by the second. Sierra 1. Davis tapped her boot. Look at the ridge, 12 o'clock high. Elena looked up. On the highest peak, far above the engagement zone, a fire was being lit. Not a tactical signal this time. A bonfire. What is that? Davis asked. It's a beacon, Elena said, a cold knot forming in her stomach. They aren't just trying to kill us, Davis. They're calling in everyone in the valley. They're inviting the neighbors to the slaughter. She settled back behind the rifle. The dissociation settled over her like a heavy blanket. The men below weren't men. The enemies weren't humans. It was just geometry and heat. It was just physics. But as she scanned the darkness, she saw movement everywhere. The valley was waking up, and she was the only thing looking back. The enemy was not stupid. They knew the shots that had killed their gunners were coming from the high ground. They just didn't have the optics to pinpoint the exact rock. So they did the next best thing. They saturated the grid square. It started with a whistling sound, high and sharp, like ripping silk. Incoming! Davis yelled, scrambling to pull his pack over his head. The mortar round impacted 20 meters below their ledge. It wasn't a direct hit, but on a shale slope, the geology became the weapon. The explosion shattered the basalt rock face, sending a shotgun blast of jagged stone shards sweeping upward. The concussion wave punched the air from Elena's lungs. Dirt rained down on her ghillie suit, burying her deeper into the earth. She squeezed her eyes shut, protecting her vision, waiting for the ringing in her ears to subside. Davis, she whispered, spitting dust. There was no answer, just a wet, gurgling sound. She rolled onto her side. The moon had risen higher, casting a pale, indifferent light over the ridge. Davis was lying on his back, clutching his left thigh. Dark fluid was pumping between his fingers, black in the NVG phosphor, but she knew it was bright arterial red. A jagged piece of rock, sharp as a razor, had sliced through the pant leg and into the meat of his quad. Hit! I'm hit! Davis gasped, his eyes wide and unfocused. The arrogance of the briefing room was gone, replaced by the primal shock of the wounded. Elena didn't speak. She didn't offer comfort. She moved with mechanical efficiency. She slung her rifle to her back and crawled over to him, keeping her profile low. She ripped the rip-away medical pouch from his vest. Hold still, she commanded. She unspooled the cat tourniquet. She slid it high up his thigh, near the groin, well above the wound. She cranked the windlass, 1 turn, 2 turns. Davis screamed, a high-pitched sound that she immediately smothered with her hand. Shut up, she hissed, her face inches from his. You scream, they find us. You want to die, or you want to keep that leg. She cranked it a 3rd time. The bleeding slowed to an ooze. She locked the rod in the clip and wrote the time on the strap with a grease marker. 245. Morphine, Davis whimpered. Not yet. You need to stay awake. You need to watch my 6. She lied. He was combat ineffective. He was going into shock. He couldn't watch anything. She dragged him deeper into the shadow of a crevice, wedging him between 2 boulders. Then she crawled back to her rifle. The radio was screaming. "Sierra! Sierra! Report!" Miller's voice was bordering on hysteria. "We are taking fire from the north. Why aren't you engaging?" Elena keyed the mic, her hands slick with Davis's blood. It made the grip of the XM-2010 slippery. She wiped it on her pants. "Sierra 2 is down," she said, her voice flat. "Casualty stabilized. I am operating solo." "Damn it," Miller cursed. "Vance, listen to me. They are moving on our blind side. The north wall has no windows. I can hear them stacking up. I need you to suppress the alleyway on the north side." Elena shifted her aim. She traversed the scope to the north side of the compound. "Negative, Chief. I have no visual on the alley. That is a dead space from my elevation." "I don't care if you can see them," Miller shouted. "Shoot through the wall! Shoot the ground! Just make noise! Keep them off us!" Elena stared through the scope. The alley was blocked by a corrugated tin roof. She couldn't see anyone. If she fired now, she would be shooting blindly into a village where the civilians, women and children, were likely hiding in the very shadows Miller wanted her to strafe. Furthermore, every shot she took without a guaranteed kill was a tracer line pointing back to her position. She had 17 rounds left. She was alone. If they found her, she died. If she died, the SEALs died. "I cannot comply," Elena said. "That is a direct order, Staff Sergeant." "I said negative." Elena's voice hardened. "I have 17 rounds. I am not wasting them on noise. I am not revealing my position for suppression. If they breach, I will engage the breach team. Until then, I hold." "If we die because you're saving ammo—" "You won't die," she cut him off. "But if I shoot now, I give away the only advantage we have left. The ghost is still in the valley, Miller. Let them remain afraid of it." She released the push-to-talk button. Her heart was hammering, not from exertion, but from the insubordination. She had just told a Master Chief to go to hell in the middle of a firefight. Beside her, Davis groaned. You just hung them out to dry." "No," Elena whispered, settling her cheek back onto the stock. She scanned the perimeter, ignoring the blind alley, looking instead for the command element that was directing the fighters. "I'm saving them. They just don't know it yet." She adjusted the focus. The wind was picking up. The storm front they had been warned about was rolling in, obscuring the stars. "Come on," she breathed, watching the tree line. "Show yourselves." Time became fluid. The digital clock on Elena's wrist read 05:15, but the darkness was stubborn, clinging to the valley floor like heavy oil. The sky to the east was bruising purple, false dawn. With the light came a new, terrifying clarity. The enemy had adapted. They realized the sniper on the ridge was denying them the open ground, so they stopped showing themselves. Instead, they moved like water through the veins of the village, using the interconnected alleyways and courtyards to close the noose around the SEAL's position. "Sierra, do you have eyes on the south alley?" Miller's voice was hoarse. The volume of fire from the SEALs had dropped significantly. They were conserving ammo. "We hear movement. Heavy footsteps, metallic scraping." Elena panned her scope. The south alley was a narrow throat between two high mud brick walls. She couldn't see into it directly, but she could see the ground at the exit. "Negative visual on personnel," Elena replied, blinking the grit from her eyes. "But I see shadows stretching." "They're setting up an RPG," Miller said, the panic rising again. "They're going to peek and shoot. If they hit this wall—" He didn't need to finish. The mud brick structure the SEALs were holding was old. A thermobaric warhead impacting the exterior would create an overpressure wave, that would liquefy the organs of everyone inside, or simply bring the heavy timber roof down on top of them. Elena studied the geometry of the alley. It was a physics problem. The shadow of a man holding a long tube projected onto the dirt street at the end of the alley. He was standing just behind the corner of a wall that looked to be about 18 inches of dried mud and straw. She knew the ballistics of the Mk-248 Mod 1 ammunition. The 220-grain projectile was a tungsten cord penetrator. At 800 meters, it still carried enough kinetic energy to crack an engine block. But could it punch through 2 feet of Afghan earth and still kill the man standing behind it? "Chief, I'm going to take a blind shot," Elena said. "Do it!" Miller screamed. Elena adjusted her turret. She didn't aim at the shadow. She traced the angle back to the wall. She visualized the man's posture. Feet planted, RPG tube on the shoulder, head tilted. She estimated his center of mass was roughly 1 meter back from the corner and 1.5 meters up. She stared at the blank, beige wall. There was no target. Just dirt. Trust the math. She verified the wind. Still. The valley was holding its breath before the sun rose. She exhaled. Center of mass. Through the wall. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. The recoil pushed her back. Through the scope, she saw a puff of dust explode from the mud wall where her bullet impacted. A clean, dark hole appeared in the brick. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the shadow on the ground spasmed. A second later, an RPG tube clattered into the open street, spinning lazily in the dust. A hand reached out from the alley, grasping at the dirt, then went limp. "Target down," Elena whispered, a cold shiver running down her spine. It felt like magic. It felt like murder. She hadn't seen him. She had just deleted him. "Good effect on target," Miller shouted, relief palpable. "Whatever you did, do it again. 2 more teams moving up." Elena cycled the bolt. Clack, clack. She scanned the next sector. This wasn't combat anymore. It was geometry. She looked for the telltale signs, the sway of a bush that shouldn't sway, the flight of frightened birds, the subtle change in the texture of shadows. To the west, she saw the top of a turban bobbing behind a low wall. Another RPG team trying to flank left. This wall was stone. The bullet wouldn't penetrate. Wait for it, she told herself. The gunner popped up, the RPG leveled. He had perhaps 2 seconds to aim and fire. Elena was already there. She didn't track him. She had ambushed the spot where his head would be. Crack. The pink mist sprayed against the rocks behind him. The rocket fired into the sky, corkscrewing wildly before detonating harmlessly against the canyon wall miles away. 2 down, she counted. 1 left. But the third team didn't appear. They had learned. Silence descended again, heavier than before. "Where are they?" Davis groaned from the crevice. He was lucid again, the pain seemingly sharpening his senses. "The third team. They aren't stupid, Viper. They're flanking you." Elena froze. She pulled her eye from the scope and looked around her immediate perimeter. The ridge was steep, but not unclimbable. While she had been focused on saving the SEALs, she had been ignoring her own security. She listened. The wind whistled through the rocks. Then, a sound. Click. Stone on stone. Behind her. She rolled onto her back, drawing her secondary weapon, the M9 pistol, just as a silhouette crested the ridgeline 10 meters away. The silhouette on the ridge lunged. Elena didn't think. She reacted. Lying on her back, she punched the M9 pistol forward, aligning the tritium sights on the center of the dark mass. The figure raised an AK-47, the barrel sweeping toward her. Pop, pop. The pistol shot sounded pathetic compared to the thunder of the sniper rifle, dry cracks that barely echoed. But at 5 meters, they were enough. The rounds took the fighter in the sternum. He crumbled backward, his rifle clattering onto the shale, sliding 5 feet down the slope before coming to a rest. Elena scrambled over to him, keeping the gun trained on his head. He was young, barely 20, his eyes wide with the shock of a death he hadn't expected to find so high up. He gasped once, pink froth bubbling on his lips, and died. "Sierra, status!" Miller's voice dragged her back from the ledge. "We heard pistol fire. Are you compromised?" Elena holstered the M9, her hands shaking violently. She grabbed a handful of dirt and scrubbed them, forcing the tremors to stop. She crawled back to the XM 2010. "Sierra is secure," she lied. Her heart was beating so hard, she could see her pulse vibrating the scope picture. "One squirter neutralized. Back on glass." "We have a new problem," Miller said, his voice tight with a specific kind of dread. "Listen." Elena turned her electronic ear protection up. Through the ambient noise of the wind, she heard it, the distinct metallic clank of a base plate being slammed onto stone. "Mortar," she whispered. "They're setting up in the courtyard directly east of us," Miller said. "Grid reference 443891. If they drop around on this roof, Vance, we're dead. The timber won't hold." Elena swung the rifle toward the coordinates. It was a walled courtyard she hadn't engaged yet, deep in the cluster of buildings. She found the tube instantly, an 82mm mortar, rusted but lethal, pointed almost vertically. 2 men were operating it. One was holding a round, preparing to drop it. "I have them," Elena said, adjusting. She settled the crosshairs. It was an easy shot, stationary targets, no wind in the courtyard. Then the door to the adjacent house kicked open. A third fighter emerged, dragging something behind him, a woman. She was wearing a blue burqa, struggling, her feet kicking up dust. Behind her, a small child, a boy, maybe 6 years old, ran out, clinging to her robes, screaming. The fighter didn't shoot them. He shoved them against the mortar tube. He forced the woman to kneel right next to the gunner, gripping her shoulder to keep her in place. The boy buried his face in her lap. "Oh, God," Elena breathed. "Sierra, take the shot," Miller yelled. "They're hanging the round." "Negative, negative," Elena shouted. "Civilians in the open. They are using human shields. They're right on top of the tube." "Vance, I don't care. If they drop that round, 6 Americans die. Drop the hammer." The logic was cold. It was the trolley problem in high definition. Kill a woman and child to save 6 SEALs, or save the civilians and watch her team burn. Elena zoomed to maximum magnification. The image was terrifyingly clear. She could see the embroidery on the boy's vest. She could see the terror in the fighter's eyes. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was daring her to shoot. To make it worse, a large white sheet hanging on a laundry line drifted across her field of view, obscuring the gunner's head every few seconds. "Vance!" Miller was screaming now. "Do it! That is an order!" "Stand by," Elena whispered. She couldn't shoot through the woman. She couldn't shoot the mortar tube itself. It wouldn't stop the round from detonating if hit. She had to hit the gunner holding the shell, and she had to miss the child's head by inches. The sheet flapped. White out. She couldn't see. "They're dropping!" Miller cried. "Wait!" The wind swirled. The sheet lifted, snapping up like a theater curtain. For a fraction of a second, the window was open. The gunner's head was separated from the woman's shoulder by a gap of 6 inches. Elena didn't make a conscious decision. Her training bypassed her morality. Her finger applied the pressure. Crack. The bullet arrived instantly. It struck the gunner in the temple. He collapsed instantly, his body falling away from the tube. The mortar round he was holding slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the paving stones. It didn't detonate. It just rolled. The woman screamed, a sound Elena couldn't hear but saw in the recoil. The blood spray covered the blue burqa. The fighter who had dragged them out panicked. He looked at the dead gunner, looked at the ridge where the invisible death had come from, and released the woman. He ran for the door. Elena put a bullet in his spine before he reached the threshold. "Target down," she choked out. "Mortar is cold. Civilians are moving." Through the scope, she saw the woman grab the boy. She didn't look up. She scrambled on hands and knees, dragging the child into the shadows of the alley, leaving the two dead men and the unexploded ordnance in the sun. "Good shot, Sierra," Miller said. His voice was relieved, but heavy. "Good shot." Elena didn't answer. She rolled away from the rifle, tearing the Velcro of her mask open. She retched, dry heaving into the dust until her stomach cramped. The sour taste of bile flooded her mouth. She had done it. She had saved the team. But as she wiped her mouth with the back of her glove, she looked at the blood on her hands, Davis's blood, and felt a stain that no amount of scrubbing would ever remove. "Sierra," Miller called again. "Status?" Elena spat into the dirt and pulled the mask back up. "Sierra is back on glass," she rasped. But she wasn't. Her hands were trembling again. The sun was fully up now, and with the light came the heat, and with the heat came the realization that this was far from over. The sun was no longer a celestial body, it was a weapon. By 0900, the temperature on the ridge had climbed past 105 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no shade. The rocks radiated heat like a pizza oven, baking Elena inside her ghillie suit. Sweat didn't drip. It pooled, soaking her base layers and turning her skin raw. But the real danger wasn't her body temperature. It was the rifle. Elena stared at the suppressor of the XM 2010. Even with the thermal cover, the heat waves were visible, a shimmering curtain of distorted air rising from the barrel. She had fired 7 rounds in rapid succession during the mortar engagement. The steel was cooking. If she fired again without letting it cool, the point of impact would shift. A millimeter of warp at the muzzle meant a miss of 6 inches at 800 meters. "Sierra, give me a scan of the western approach." Miller's voice crackled. "Stand by," Elena croaked. Her tongue felt like a piece of felt. She reached for her hydration tube. It was dry. She sucked air. "Davis," she whispered, turning her head. "Water." Davis was wedged deep in the crevice, his face pale and waxy under the layer of dust. The tourniquet was doing its job, but the pain was eating him alive. He fumbled with his pack, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I dropped my bladder," he mumbled, eyes fluttering. "During the climb. Remember?" Elena cursed silently. She had half a liter left in her own ruck, sitting 5 meters away. Whoomp! The sound was distant, soft, almost polite. Elena froze. She knew that sound. It wasn't the sharp crack of a rifle. It was the dull thud of a mortar round leaving the tube. "Incoming!" she hissed. She didn't have time to scramble for cover. She flattened herself against the earth, pressing her face into the dirt. Crump. The round landed 50 meters down the slope. The ground jumped. Shrapnel whined overhead like angry hornets. Whoomp. "They're bracketing," Elena realized with a jolt of terror. The first round was short. The next would be long. The third would split the difference. They had found her. She looked at Davis. He was trapped in the rock fissure. It offered him decent protection from shrapnel, but if a direct hit landed on the ledge, the concussion alone would kill him. "Viper," Davis rasped, seeing the realization in her eyes. "You have to move." "I can't move you," she said, her voice tight. "Your leg is hamburger. If I drag you, you bleed out." "I know," he said. He reached for his M4 carbine, pulling it across his chest. "I didn't say move me. I said move you." The logic hit her like a physical blow. If she stayed, the mortars would keep pounding this grid until they were both dead. If she moved and fired from a new position, the enemy would shift their fire to chase the threat. She had to use herself as bait. "I'll come back," she promised, her voice breaking. "Just go," Davis coughed. "Draw them off. Go. Whoomp." Elena grabbed her rifle. She didn't take her ruck. It was too heavy, too slow. She abandoned her food, her extra water, her batteries. She took only the rifle, her ammo, and the radio. She rolled over the lip of the ridge, out of the depression, and into the open sunlight. She couldn't run. Running attracted the eye. She had to crawl. The ground was a torture of jagged shale and thorns. She dragged herself on her elbows and knees, the rifle cradled in her arms. 10 meters. 20 meters. Crump. The second round landed 30 meters behind her original position. They had the bracket. The next one would hit the crevice. "Come on, you bastards," she grunted, forcing her body forward. The heat was dizzying. Black spots danced in her vision. She reached a pile of boulders about 100 meters east of Davis. It wasn't good cover, but it was distinct. It was visible from the village. She threw the rifle onto a rock. No time for stability checks. No time for windage. She needed a muzzle flash. She needed to scream, "I am here." She aimed at a blank wall in the village and pulled the trigger. Crack. The sound echoed off the canyon walls. "Sierra engaging!" she yelled into the radio, ensuring the enemy, who were likely monitoring the frequency, heard her. She waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Whoomp! Whoomp! 2 rounds were in the air. She curled into a ball behind the boulder, hugging her knees, praying the rock was thick enough. Boom! Boom! The earth heaved. The impacts were close, terrifyingly close. Dirt and rock rained down on her, burying her legs. But they weren't hitting the crevice. They were hitting her new position. She coughed, choking on the sulfur-tasting dust. She peered through the haze back toward where she had left Davis. The crevice was untouched. Her rucksack, however, left 5 meters from the hole, was gone, obliterated. Her water, her food, gone. "Sierra, sound off!" Miller yelled. "Sierra is functional," Elena replied, spitting grit. She checked the rifle. It was covered in dust, the action grinding as she worked the bolt. She poured the last few drops of water from her canteen onto the bolt carrier group to wash away the mud. It sizzled. She was alive. Davis was alive. But she was now isolated, 100 meters from her only support, with no water in 110-degree heat, and the enemy knew exactly where she was. She looked down at the village. The sun was high now, casting short, sharp shadows. The thermal runaway wasn't just in her rifle, it was in her body. She could feel her core temperature rising, the beginning of heat exhaustion creeping in like a fog. 9 hours, she whispered to herself. Just hold for 9 hours. But it had only been 4. The world had shrunk. It was no longer a valley or a ridge, or even a battlefield. It was a circle. The black ring of the scope's housing and the amber crosshair suspended in the center. Everything outside that circle was a blur of white-hot pain and noise that didn't matter. Elena lay motionless behind the boulder. She hadn't moved in 2 hours. The sun was directly overhead now, a vertical hammer striking the back of her neck. Her ghillie suit, designed to break up her outline, had become a kiln. She checked her watch. The digits swam before her eyes. 1300. 9 hours since insertion. 7 hours since the first shot. She had 4 rounds left in the magazine and 5 loose rounds in her pocket. 9 bullets. And the enemy was still there. Sierra. Status. Miller's voice in her ear was thin, sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Elena tried to answer, but her tongue was swollen, stuck to the roof of her mouth. She worked her jaw, peeling the flesh away. Sierra. Holding, she croaked. The sound was hideous, a dry rattle. Her body was failing. It started with the tremors in her hands. Fine motor control, the sniper's currency, was depreciating rapidly. She pressed her cheek to the stock, trying to stabilize the reticle. It danced. Up, down, left, right. She couldn't lock it on the window frame she was watching. Control, she ordered herself. Box breathing. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. She inhaled. The air was dust and fire. Hold. Her heart fluttered. A skipped beat. Arrhythmia. Dehydration was thickening her blood, turning it into sludge that the heart struggled to pump. Out. You should have stayed at the base, a voice said. Elena jerked her head to the left. A man was sitting cross-legged in the open, right next to her. He was wearing a clean woodland BDU uniform. It was her father. He looked exactly as he had the day he died 10 years ago. You aren't built for this, Ellie, he said calmly, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Go home. Elena blinked. The figure dissolved into a heat shimmer and a scrub bush. Hallucination. Stage 2, heat stroke. She squeezed her eyes shut. She needed fluid. Now. If she didn't cool her core and hydrate, she would pass out within 20 minutes. If she passed out, the SEALs below, who were relying on her periodic shots to keep the RPG teams suppressed, would be overrun. She looked around. Her water bladder was gone, vaporized by the mortar. 10 meters away, in a depression in the rock, there was a small, stagnant puddle. It was left over from the rainstorm 3 days ago. It was brown, covered in a slick of green algae and dead insects. It was warm filth. It was life. Elena started to crawl. Every inch was a negotiation. Her elbows were raw. The skin rubbed off inside her sleeves. She dragged the rifle with her, never leave the weapon, and pulled herself toward the depression. The smell hit her first. Rotting vegetation and stagnation. She reached the edge. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about dysentery or giardia or the parasites that would ravage her gut in 24 hours. She thought only of the plasma volume in her veins. She cupped her gloved hand and scooped the brown sludge. She forced it past her cracked lips. It tasted of mud and copper. It was warm, repulsive. She gagged, her stomach contracting violently, but she swallowed it down. She scooped again, and again. "Sierra!" Miller yelled. "Movement! West wall! They're massing for a rush!" The water hit her stomach like a stone, but the psychological effect was instant. She wasn't dry anymore. Elena rolled back onto her rifle. She wiped the mud from her mouth, smearing it across her face, blending with the camo paint and the dirt. She looked through the scope. The blur was gone. The tremors had lessened. Below, 5 men were sprinting from the tree line toward the breach in the west wall. They were screaming, firing from the hip, a final desperate push to overwhelm the Americans. "I see them," Elena whispered. She found the rhythm again. The biological machine came back online. Range, 600. Lead, 2 mils. Crack. The lead runner dropped. Bolt. Crack. The second runner stumbled, clutching his stomach. The others dove for cover. The rush was broken. Good hits, Miller said. Goddamn, Vance, good hits. Elena didn't feel pride. She didn't feel relief. She felt the mud settling in her gut, a heavy, cold reminder of what she had just done to survive. She was drinking the battlefield now. She was part of it. 7 rounds left, she counted. She licked the algae from her teeth and waited for the next ghost to appear. The sky tore open. The storm front that had grounded the birds for the last 4 hours suddenly disintegrated, blown apart by the savage winds of the Hindu Kush. Blue sky punched through the gray clouds, and with it came the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard, the high-pitched whine of turbofans. Sandman. This is Hog 1-1, checking in as fragged. A voice crackled over the net. It was calm, Texan, and utterly detached from the hell on the ground. We have 4 minutes of playtime. Requesting talk on. Hog 1-1, this is Alpha, Miller screamed, his voice breaking. We are declaring broken arrow. I repeat, broken arrow. We are overrun. Enemy is inside the wire. Broken arrow. The code phrase for a unit facing imminent destruction. It authorized air crews to drop ordnance inside danger-close distances, disregarding standard safety margins. It was a plea for salvation that usually came with a high cost. Elena wiped the sweat from her eyes. She looked down at the compound. The enemy heard the jets too. They knew what was coming. Instead of retreating, they did the smart thing. They surged forward. Dozens of fighters poured out of the tree lines and alleyways, sprinting toward the SEALs building. They were hugging the belt, closing the distance to within 10 meters of the Americans. If the A-10s fired on them, they would hit the SEALs too. Alpha, I see a lot of clutter in the grid, the pilot said. I cannot distinguish friendlies. You are too close. I need a mark. Sparkle the target. I don't have IR, Miller yelled. My PEQ is smashed. Sierra, do you have eyes? Elena checked her own equipment. Her PEQ-15 laser designator was dead, batteries drained by the heat, or failed electronics. She couldn't paint the target with an invisible laser for the pilot's goggles. Negative on IR, Elena reported. Hog 1-1, I am Sierra Element on the ridge to the north. I have visual on the enemy massing at the west wall. Sierra, if you can't sparkle, I can't shoot, the pilot said. I'm not risking a blue-on-blue with 30 milliliters. Give me a mark or I wave off. They're breaching the door, Miller screamed. Gunfire erupted in the background of his transmission, close indoor combat. The SEALs were fighting hand-to-hand. Elena looked at her magazine. She had a mix of ball ammo and one tracer. She always kept one tracer at the bottom of the mag as a low ammo warning. It was a red-tipped round that burned bright phosphorus during flight. It was a visual mark, but there was an old sniper adage. Tracers work both ways. If she fired a tracer, the pilot would see the line of fire and strafe the end of it. But every fighter in the valley would also see exactly where the shot came from. It was suicide. It was a flare gun announcing her position to the world. Hog 1-1, Elena said, her voice dropping to a flat command tone. I will mark with kinetic tracer. Watch my trace. Reference the impact point. Enemy is 5 meters west of impact. Cleared hot? I'm watching, Sierra. Cleared hot on your trace. Elena loaded the red-tipped cartridge. She worked the bolt. The metal was hot enough to blister her skin, but she didn't feel it. She aimed at the cluster of fighters stacking up on the west wall, right outside the room where Davis and the others were bleeding. Don't miss. She exhaled. Crack. The bullet left the barrel. Instantly, a bright red streak of fire painted a line through the air, burning furiously against the backdrop of the dusty valley. It slammed into the stone wall right next to the fighters, exploding in a shower of sparks. "Tally!" the pilot shouted. "Visual on the trace! Rolling in!" Elena rolled away from the rifle immediately, curling into a ball behind the boulder. The sky screamed. The A-10 Thunderbolt II dove from the heavens, a gray shark with teeth. The sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon didn't come when the gun fired. The bullets traveled faster than sound. First, the ground exploded. The earth around the west wall simply ceased to exist, churned into a cloud of pulverized rock and pink mist. Then came the sound. Brrrt. A low, guttural tearing of the atmosphere, like God ripping a piece of canvas. The vibration shook Elena's teeth in her skull. The strafing run obliterated the enemy assault team. The 30mm depleted uranium shells shredded the stone wall, the fighters, and the ground they stood on. It was absolute, indiscriminate violence. Good guns, the pilot drawled. Winchester on ammo. RTB. The jet banked hard, flares popping from its tail as it climbed back into the sun. Elena lay in the dirt, ears ringing. The immediate threat to the SEALs was gone. The west wall was a smoking crater. But then, the inevitable response came. A bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending stone splinters into her cheek. Then another. Then a storm. They had seen the tracer. The remaining fighters in the valley, the ones the A-10 hadn't killed, turned their weapons upward. They weren't shooting at the SEALs anymore. They were shooting at the red line. "Sierra!" Miller called, his voice filled with awe and horror. "They're shifting fire. They're all looking at you." "I know," Elena whispered, pressing herself into the dirt as the air around her snapped with hundreds of rounds. She had saved them, but she had just rang the dinner bell for every rifle in Kamdesh. "I'm pinned," she said. "I'm pinned." The A-10 had bought them a pause, not a victory. The dust was still settling, a choking gray curtain over the ruins of the west wall, when the sound of heavy rotors began to thump against the valley floor. "Big Windy is inbound!" The JTAC's voice crackled, replacing the pilot's. "1 minute out! Pop smoke at the LZ!" Down in the compound, a canister spiraled out from the SEAL's position. Yellow smoke hissed, billowing thick and bright against the drab earth. "Moving!" Miller yelled. "Go! Go! Go!" The team broke cover. They looked like battered insects, scurrying from the wreckage of the mud brick house toward the flat patch of agricultural land designated as the landing zone. They were carrying 2 litters now. Davis and another operator hit during the breach. They were slow. Painfully slow. Elena lay pinned behind her boulder. The enemy fire directed at her had slackened slightly as the fighters realized the SEALs were escaping, but the air around her still snapped with occasional erratic rounds. She had 3 rounds left, 1 magazine, the last magazine. She watched the team run. Miller was bringing up the rear, walking backward, firing his carbine to suppress the tree line. He was 10 meters from the smoke. Then, he dropped. It wasn't the stumble of a man tripping over a root. It was the violent collapse of a puppet whose strings had been cut. Miller's leg kicked out, and he hit the dirt hard, rolling immediately to find cover behind a low berm. "Sniper!" Miller screamed. "I'm hit! Femoral! I'm hit!" The team froze. 2 operators turned back, abandoning the run, to the bird to grab their leader. "Leave me!" Miller roared. "Get to the bird!" They ignored him, grabbing his vest to drag him, but the incoming fire was precise now. Crack, crack. Dust kicked up inches from their hands. The enemy sniper was locked in. He had the LZ dialed. He was going to pick them off one by one as they tried to board the helicopter. "Sierra!" Miller yelled, his voice strained with pain. "Do you see him?" Elena swept her scope frantically. "Negative. I can't see the angle. He's defilade to my position." She cursed. The enemy marksman was smart. He had positioned himself deep in a rocky cleft on the opposite slope, shielded from her ridge by a jutting spur of rock. From her prone position behind the boulder, he was invisible. If she wanted to see him, she had to move. She had to gain elevation. She looked at the boulder protecting her. It was solid. It was safe. If she stayed here, she lived. The helicopter would land. The SEALs might die, but she would go home. She looked at Miller, the man who had called her a liability, the man who was currently bleeding out in the dirt, refusing to let his men die for him. "Physics," she whispered. "It's just physics." Elena stood up. She didn't crawl. She didn't crouch. She rose to a full kneeling position, exposing her head and torso above the protection of the rock. The wind hit her face. It felt cool. Instantly, she saw him. The change in angle cleared the obstruction. The enemy sniper was 600 meters away, tucked into the shadow of a cave mouth. She saw the glint of his barrel. She saw the muzzle flash as he fired another round at the rescue team. "I see you." The enemy sniper saw her too. She was a silhouette against the skyline, a target that couldn't be missed. He shifted his aim. Elena saw the barrel traverse. He was abandoning Miller to kill the threat on the ridge. This was the trade. Her life for the team's. Time slowed down. The thumping of the inbound Chinook rotors faded into a dull, rhythmic heartbeat. She didn't feel the heat anymore. She didn't feel the thirst. She felt a profound, quiet clarity. She settled the crosshairs on the dark shape in the cave. Breathe. The enemy fired. She saw the muzzle flash. She knew the bullet was in the air, supersonic. It would arrive in less than a second. She didn't flinch. She finished her trigger pull. Crack. Her rifle fired. A fraction of a second later, the world ended. It felt like being hit in the head with a baseball bat swung by a giant. There was no pain, just a massive, concussive impact that snapped her neck back. White light exploded behind her eyes. She was thrown backward, the rifle flying from her hands. She hit the ground hard, the shale biting into her back. Darkness rushed in from the edges of her vision. A high-pitched ringing drowned out the world. She stared up at the blue sky, watching a single hawk circling high above the carnage. Did I get him? She couldn't move her legs. She couldn't feel her hands. Then, through the ringing, she heard a voice. "Sniper down! Target down! We are clear! Get Miller on the bird!" The vibration of the ground increased. The Chinook was landing. The dust cloud washed over her ridge, covering her in a shroud of brown powder. Elena tried to smile, but her face felt numb. She closed her eyes. The silence she had been fighting for 9 hours finally arrived. Consciousness returned in fragments, stitched together by pain. The first thing Elena felt was the taste of copper in her mouth. The second was the screaming in her ears, a high-pitched electronic whine that drowned out the world. She tried to sit up, but the horizon tilted violently to the left. She dry-heaved, her stomach contracting on empty air and algae water. She reached up to touch her head. Her gloved fingers found the jagged, splintered edge of Kevlar on the right side of her helmet. The round hadn't penetrated. It had struck the curved composite surface, skidded along the side, and deflected off the NVG mount, snapping her head back with the force of a sledgehammer. She was alive, but her brain felt like it was floating in broken glass. "Sierra! Sierra! Check in!" The voice in her earpiece was faint, battling the tinnitus. It was the pilot. "Sierra is moving," she slurred. She forced herself to her knees. The world spun, but she locked her eyes on a stationary rock until it stabilized. "We have Alpha on board," the pilot said. "We are coming for you. Pinnacle landing on the ridgeline. You have 90 seconds. Mark your position." 90 seconds. Elena looked back toward the crevice where she had left Davis. It was 100 meters away, 100 meters of uphill, jagged shale under the midday sun. "Davis," she whispered. She stood up. Her legs were rubber. She stumbled, fell, and got back up. She left the XM-2010 behind. The barrel was warped, the scope smashed by the fall. It was dead weight. She kept only the radio. She reached the crevice. Davis was still there, wedged between the rocks. He was gray. His eyes rolled back in his head. The tourniquet had held, but he had lost a lot of blood. "Davis!" She slapped his face. "Wake up!" He groaned, his eyelids fluttering. "Mom?" "Not your mom. It's the green stamp. We're leaving." She grabbed the drag handle on the back of his vest. She dug her boots into the loose scree. She pulled. He was heavy, dead weight heavy. A 200-pound man with 50 pounds of gear. Elena screamed with the effort, a primal sound that tore her dry throat. She moved him a foot, then another. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, fluttering with the arrhythmia of severe dehydration. Just physics, she told herself. Leverage and friction. Above her, the sun was blotted out. A massive shadow fell over the ridge. The Chinook was there. The dual-rotor beast didn't land. The pilot hovered the rear of the aircraft over the edge of the cliff, the front wheels hanging in empty air, a pinnacle landing. The ramp lowered, hovering 3 feet above the shifting rocks. The downdraft was immense, a hurricane of dust and gravel that stung her exposed face. "Come on." A crew chief waved from the ramp, tethered by a monkey tail. She was 10 meters away. She couldn't do it. Her muscles failed. Her knees buckled. She fell into the dirt, still clutching Davis's drag handle. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't." She looked up at the ramp, defeated. She had fought for 9 hours, killed 17 men, and survived a headshot, only to fail in the last 10 meters. Then, a figure appeared on the ramp. It wasn't the crew chief. It was a SEAL. He was battered, his uniform torn, his face masked in blood and soot. It was the youngest operator, the one who had laughed the loudest at the briefing. He didn't wave. He jumped. He landed in the shale, sliding down toward her. He didn't say a word. He grabbed the other side of Davis's vest. He looked at Elena. His eyes weren't mocking anymore. They were wide with something that looked like awe. "I got him!" the kid yelled over the rotor wash. "I got him! Move your ass, Viper!" Viper. Not green stamp, not stray. Elena found a reserve of energy she didn't know she had. They heaved together. They dragged Davis up the last few feet of the slope. Hands reached out from the darkness of the cargo hold. Crew chiefs, other SEALs. They grabbed Davis and yanked him inside. The young SEAL grabbed Elena by the strap of her plate carrier and hauled her up the ramp. She scrambled onto the non-slip metal floor, just as the pilot applied power. The bird lurched upward. The ramp hissed closed, sealing out the blinding sun and the valley of death. Elena collapsed against the bulkhead. The vibration of the airframe rattled her teeth. She looked around. The red interior lights of the cargo bay washed over the team. They were all there, battered, bleeding, bandaged. Miller was lying on a litter, an IV line running into his arm. He was looking at her. Elena tried to hold his gaze, but the darkness was finally winning. Her head lolled back against the metal wall. The last thing she saw before she passed out was the young SEAL unbuckling his canteen and holding it toward her lips. The interior of the CH-47 Chinook was a cavern of vibrating red light. The tactical lamps bathed everything in the cargo hold in the color of fresh arterial blood, flattening depth perception and turning the exhausted faces of the men into hollowed-out skulls. Elena drifted back to consciousness, not all at once, but in waves that synchronized with the thumping of the twin rotors overhead. The air was thick, a suffocating cocktail of JP-8 aviation fuel, burnt gunpowder, antiseptic alcohol, and the sour copper reek of sweat and fear. "Stay with me, Sergeant." A flight medic was leaning over her, his face obscured by a helmet and visor. He was shouting to be heard over the screaming transmission, but his hands were gentle. He was wiping the grime from her face with a piece of gauze. "Can you hear me? Squeeze my hand." Elena squeezed. Her grip was weak, trembling. "Good." The medic nodded. "Pupils are sluggish. You've got a grade 2 concussion. You're dehydrated to hell and back. I'm starting a line." He didn't wait for permission. He pierced the vein in her forearm with a catheter. The cool rush of saline hit her bloodstream like ice water. It was painful, but it was the only thing that felt real. She turned her head slowly, fighting the nausea that rolled in her gut with every lurch of the airframe. The cargo bay was crowded. The SEALs were slumped along the canvas bench seats, stripped of their bravado. They looked small. The giant, invincible warriors of the briefing room were now just men, dirty, bleeding, and staring at the floor. Davis was on a litter strapped to the floor plates in the center. He was unconscious, an oxygen mask over his face, 2 medics working on his leg. His pants had been cut away, revealing the mass of bandages that covered the work Elena had done in the dark. "Is he?" Elena tried to speak, but her voice was gone. She coughed, tasting dust. "Is he okay?" The medic followed her gaze. "He's stable. He'll keep the leg. You put that tourniquet on high and tight. Saved his life." Elena nodded, leaning her head back against the nylon webbing of the seat. She closed her eyes, but the images were burned into her retinas. The woman in the blue burqa. The boy. The red mist of the sniper in the cave. Vance. The name wasn't shouted. It was spoken with a gravelly, pained intensity that cut through the engine noise. Elena opened her eyes. Master Chief Miller was sitting directly across from her. He was propped up against the bulkhead, his right leg immobilized in a splint. His face was a mask of soot and dried blood, his beard matted with dust. The arrogance that had defined him 24 hours ago had been scrubbed away by the valley. He was staring at her. The other SEALs noticed. Heads lifted. The young operator who had pulled her onto the ramp stopped drinking his water. The bay went still, save for the mechanical roar of the flight. Miller shifted, wincing as pain shot up his hip. He looked at the helmet resting in Elena's lap, the one with the deep gouge where the sniper's bullet had deflected. He looked at her hands, still stained with the algae and mud of the ridge. He opened his mouth. His lips formed the beginning of a word. "Thank." Or maybe "I'm sore." But then he looked into her eyes. Elena didn't look away. She didn't blink. Her expression was completely slack. The light behind her eyes, the eagerness, the desire to prove herself, the green stamp freshness was extinguished. In its place was a flat, cold void. It was the look of a human being who had reduced the world to a math problem of survival and subtracted 17 lives to solve it. It was the 1,000-yard stare. Miller saw it. He recognized it because he saw it in the mirror every morning. He realized, with a jolt of visible shame, that he was the one who had put it there. He closed his mouth. The words died in his throat. There was nothing he could say to her now. She wasn't a subordinate anymore. She wasn't a female attachment. She was a creature of the same violent world he inhabited, and the admission fee had been her soul. He nodded, a single, slow dip of his chin. Acknowledgement. Elena didn't nod back. She simply turned her head toward the small porthole window behind her. Outside, the Afghan landscape rolled by in the twilight, a jagged, beautiful, hateful ocean of rock. She watched her own reflection in the plexiglass. A stranger stared back. A ghost. The pilot's voice crackled over the ship-wide intercom. 1 minute to wheels down at Bagram. Medical teams are on the pad. Prepare for offload. The pitch of the rotors changed, the deep thumping slowing as the bird flared for landing. The gravity pushed Elena down into the seat. She felt the wheels touch the tarmac. The ramp hissed open. Cool, clean air rushed in, smelling of diesel and civilization. But Elena found she missed the smell of the dust. The dust was honest. "Let's move," the medic said, unhooking her IV bag to carry it with her. "Can you walk?" Elena unbuckled her belt. She stood up. Her legs were shaky, but they held. "I can walk," she said. She stepped off the ramp and into the blinding floodlights of the base, walking alone, leaving the team behind in the shadows of the cargo hold. The room was freezing. After the furnace of the Korengal Valley, the air conditioning in the Joint Operations Center, JOC, at Bagram Airfield felt like a physical assault. It bit into Elena's exposed skin, making the dried sweat and mud flake off in itch-inducing patches. She sat on a metal folding chair in the center of a small, soundproofed interrogation room, shivering uncontrollably. She hadn't been allowed to shower. She hadn't been allowed to sleep. Immediate intelligence debriefs were mandatory for high kinetic events. Across the laminate table sat 2 men. They were clean. Their uniforms were crisp, smelling of laundry detergent. They had soft hands and clear eyes. One was a lieutenant commander from JAG, Judge Advocate General. The other was a civilian from an agency that didn't put its name on the door. "State your name and rank for the record," the JAG officer said, tapping a pen on a yellow legal pad. "Staff Sergeant Elena Vance," she rasped. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. "Sergeant Vance, we have reviewed the drone feed and your scope's internal recording," the civilian said. He didn't look up from his laptop. "You have 17 confirmed kills in a 9-hour window. That is, a high volume for a single shooter." "They kept coming," Elena said. "I kept shooting." "It's the nature of the engagements that concerns us," the JAG officer said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Specifically, Event Log 0730, the mortar pit." He pressed play. On the screen, the grainy black and white thermal footage from her scope played back. Elena watched herself kill the man again. She saw the white-hot bloom of the woman and child huddled next to the tube. She saw the laundry sheet flutter. She saw the gunner's head explode. "You fired within 6 inches of a non-combatant," the officer said, pausing the video. "A woman and a child." The wind variable was gusting at 15 miles per hour. A deviation of 2 MOA would have resulted in a civilian casualty. I compensated for the wind, Elena said dully. That's not the point, the officer snapped. The rules of engagement state we do not engage if there is a significant risk of collateral damage. You took a gamble, Sergeant. You risked a diplomatic incident to save a tactical asset. I didn't gamble. Elena looked up, her eyes hard. And the tactical asset was 6 human beings who were about to be turned into pink mist by an 82mm mortar. I made the calculation. I took the shot. And if you had missed? The civilian asked softly. If you had killed the boy? Elena stared at the frozen image of the child on the screen. Then I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be in the brig. But I didn't miss. The civilian leaned back, crossing his arms. This level of aggression, it's unusual, especially given your lack of prior combat experience. One might argue you were overcompensating, trying to prove something to the SEALs. The accusation hung in the air. You're a girl trying to play with the big boys, and you got trigger happy. Elena's hands curled into fists under the table. She was too tired to fight them. She was too tired to explain that the aggression wasn't emotional. It was survival. I did my job, she whispered. We're going to recommend a formal inquiry, the JAG officer said, closing the folder. Pending psychological evaluation. We need to determine if this was sound judgment or a stress response. The door to the interrogation room slammed open. It hit the wall with a violence that made the civilian jump. Master Chief Miller hobbled into the room. He was leaning heavily on a pair of aluminum crutches, his right leg encased in a rigid brace. He was still wearing his combat pants, cut away at the thigh, and a blood-stained t-shirt. He hadn't showered either. He smelled of war. Chief, the JAG officer stood up, flustered. You're not cleared for this session. You need to be in the infirmary. Sit down, Lieutenant, Miller growled. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He projected a density of presence that sucked the air out of the room. He crutched his way to the table and looked down at the 2 men. I heard you were grilling my shooter, Miller said. We are conducting a standard AAR regarding a potential ROE violation, the civilian said, though his voice wavered. ROE violation? Miller laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Let me tell you what happened on that ridge. That woman, Staff Sergeant Vance, held a defensive line alone for 9 hours. She took fire from heavy machine guns, mortars, and small arms. She was dehydrated, heat-stoked, and concussed. He leaned over the table, placing his knuckles on the laminate. And while she was dying up there, she saved every single one of my men. That shot you're crying about? That shot saved my life. It saved Davis. It saved the mission. Chief, the protocol. Screw the protocol, Miller cut him off. There is no inquiry. There is no psych eval. You write down that Staff Sergeant Vance acted with exemplary courage and distinct precision under fire. You write that she is the reason 6 families get their fathers back this Christmas. He stared at the JAG officer until the man looked away. Do we have a problem, sir? Miller asked. The officer cleared his throat. He looked at the civilian, then back at Miller. He slowly opened the folder and picked up his pen. No problem, Master Chief. We can classify this as a clean engagement. Good, Miller said. He turned to Elena. For the first time since she had arrived at the base, he looked at her without the filter of rank or gender. He looked at her as a peer. Vance, he said softly, get out of here. Go get some chow. Get some sleep. We roll out in 48 hours. Elena stood up. Her legs felt stiff. She looked at the officers, then at Miller. "Thank you, Chief," she said. "Don't thank me," Miller grunted, turning his back to hobble toward the door. "Just clean your rifle. You're spotting for me next time." Elena walked out of the room. The hallway was long and white and sterile. She heard the buzz of the fluorescent lights, sounding like 1,000 angry flies. She had won. She was cleared. She had the respect of the team. But as she walked, she looked down at her hands. They were clean now, scrubbed pink in the bathroom sink before the meeting. But she could still feel the weight of the trigger. She could still see the boy's face. The validation felt hollow. The medals, the respect, the cleared record. None of it fixed the fact that she had broken something inside herself that would never heal. She was a hero, and she had never felt more alone. 2 days later, the armory was the only quiet place on Bagram Airfield. Staff Sergeant Elena Vance sat on a wooden bench, a rag soaked in CLP solvent in her hand. Disassembled before her lay the XM 2010. It looked different now. Before the mission, it had been a piece of government property, sterile, serial numbered, a tool in a box. Now, it felt like an extension of her own nervous system. She scrubbed the carbon from the bolt face. The metal was stained dark, the heat of the rapid fire having baked the propellant deep into the steel pores. The polymer stock was scratched where she had dragged it over the shale. The scope still had dust in the adjustment knobs that no amount of compressed air could dislodge. She reassembled the firing pin. Click, slide, lock. Her hands didn't tremble anymore. The heat exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, efficient lethargy. She moved slower, but with zero wasted energy. "Yo, check it out!" The voice came from the doorway. Elena didn't look up. She heard the heavy tread of fresh boots, clean boots that hadn't yet walked through a kill zone. 3 men walked in. They were big, loud, and bristling with new gear. Replacements, fresh meat for the grinder to replace the casualties from Alpha Platoon. "What do we have here?" the lead guy asked, stepping closer to her bench. He was tall, blonde, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of ignorance. He saw the ponytail tied back at the base of Elena's neck. He saw the lack of a trident on her chest. "Hey, sweetheart," the guy grinned, leaning his hip against the table. "You lost? The admin building is on the other side of the compound. This cage is for shooters." Elena paused. She held the bolt carrier group in her hand. It weighed 2 pounds. It was a dense block of machined steel. She didn't speak. She just looked at the reflection of the fluorescent light on the oil. "I'm talking to you," the guy said, his grin fading into annoyance. "Or do you just clean the weapons for the real operators?" The sound of crutches hitting concrete echoed from the back of the room. Thump, scrape, thump. The 3 new guys turned around. Master Chief Miller stood there. He was out of the hospital gown, back in uniform, but his leg was heavily braced. His face was pale, the lines around his eyes etched deeper than before. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 48 hours. "Attention on deck," the blonde guy said instinctively, straightening up. Miller ignored him. He hobbled forward, his eyes fixed on Elena. He stopped at the end of the bench. "Is the rifle serviceable, Vance?" Miller asked quietly. Elena slid the bolt into the receiver. She pushed it forward and locked it down. The sound was sharp, final. "Rifle is green, Chief," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the eagerness she had shown him in the briefing room just days ago. "Good," Miller said. "We got the frag order. New intel package. Helmand Province. We leave at 0400. The blond guy looked between them, confused. He let out a nervous chuckle. Chief, with all due respect, we're taking her. I thought we were getting a full team. We don't need a female attachment slowing us down. The air in the room temperature dropped. Miller turned, his head slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't explode. He looked at the new guy with an expression that was almost pitying. It was the look a survivor gives to someone who has no idea they are already dead. Son, Miller said softly. You see that woman? The new guy nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, Chief. That woman is the only reason you have a platoon to join, Miller said. She isn't an attachment. She is the Overwatch. And if you are very, very lucky, she might decide to save your life when you inevitably screw up. Miller stepped closer, invading the new guy's space. You will speak to her with the respect you would give a deity, Miller whispered. Because up on that ridge, that is exactly what she is. She is the ghost that decides who wakes up tomorrow. Do you understand me? Yes, Master Chief, the guy stammered, his face draining of color. Get your gear. Get out of my sight. The three men scrambled out of the armory, their boots scuffing the floor in their haste to escape the tension. Silence returned. Elena picked up a clean rag and wiped the excess oil from the barrel. She didn't look at Miller. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, Miller replied. He leaned against the wall, taking the weight off his bad leg. You aren't the rookie anymore, Elena. You can't let them talk to you like that. It doesn't matter what they say, Elena said. She stood up, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. The weight was familiar now. It wasn't heavy. It was just a part of her gravity. They talk. I shoot. That's the deal. Miller watched her. He saw the change. He saw the wall she had built around herself. The same wall he had built 20 years ago. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. He wanted to tell her that it got easier. But he respected her too much to lie. We step off in 4 hours, Miller said. I'll be at the Bird, Elena replied. She walked past him. She didn't salute. She didn't smile. She walked out of the bright lights of the armory and into the pre-dawn darkness of the airfield. Outside, the wind was blowing from the mountains. It carried the smell of dust and dry earth. Elena breathed it in. It didn't scare her anymore. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, looked toward the black silhouette of the waiting Chinook on the flight line, and began the long walk toward the next war.